Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very accomplished sports person turned entrepreneur from Sydney, Australia, Mr. Ryan Gonsalves. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Ryan is the founder and chief executive officer of secondwind.io, which is a platform that empowers former elite athletes as they navigate their journey beyond sports. He himself has been a professional football player at the age of 16 with the Huddersfield Town football field in the English Championship. And in addition to, of course, sports, Ryan has also worked with General Electric, HSBC, and Australian banking giants, AMP, CBA, and Westpac. So, Ryan, before we speak about the Second Wind Academy, tell me about your own journey.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to. As you mentioned, and it was a very good opening as well, so thanks for that. I left school at 16 to become a professional footballer. Mm-hmm. Now, that was quite unique in my family. I was the first generation of British-born Caribbean settlers. And so it was quite a fascinating experience for me and my family to go into the football or to the world of football. Maybe perhaps 4 years later, due to injuries, a bit of naivety and a strong-willed mother, I found myself playing semi-professional football whilst studying at university, actually studying marketing and modern languages. Now, that was a great experience simply because it enabled me to see what was out there. I got to study in the US, in Europe, in France and in Belgium in particular. And that was a wonderful experience. And eventually my girlfriend, now wife, we moved to the south of France. We lived there for a couple of years until I really then embarked on a corporate career joining General Electric, GE Capital, on one of their management programs. And had a great time traveling the world with them and HSBC, and living in Hong Kong for 10 years, moving over to Australia and climbing the corporate ladder, as it was, becoming a global head of product and innovation and strategy. Wow. Yeah. So truly wonderful experiences, getting to travel around whilst also keeping very much with my passion of football and sport in general. And, fantastic opportunity to live and work in many countries and cities around the world.
How wonderful. And what inspired you to create Second Wind Academy? And is there a personal story behind it?
Yeah, actually, it is a very personal story. So for me, being a former professional footballer, I had to go through that transition from being full-time football, having that very clear dream, and then transitioning into something else, a semi-pro footballer, a student, and then moving around the world. And I found myself in Hong Kong at a Masters tournament, playing against other former professional footballers. And there's one chap in particular who was a bit of an idol of mine as I grew up. And as I was standing with him in between games, I asked him, how's it going? And he told me a story that just wasn't positive. He said it was really challenging for him. He did not really enjoy the transition that he had gone through. And that got me wondering, well, what is it like for everyone else? How did my friends, my former teammates, how have they found their transition? So I reached out to them, and one conversation led to another until I found myself really immersed in the whole career transition, not just for footballers, but across all athletes.
Amazing. And tell me, Ryan, what are some of the specific challenges former elite athletes face when transitioning out of sports? And do share some examples.
Yeah, sure thing. Look, there are a multitude. Look, one of the main ones is that shift in identity. That loss of sporting identity from, let's say, Ryan the footballer to Ryan the, well, I don't know what's next. If I've dedicated so much of my life to that game, that particular sport, one of the biggest challenges athletes face is letting go or changing that sporting identity. Another one very much looks at, I would say fear of the unknown. Again, they grow up in a very structured, rule-oriented type environment whereby the goal to succeed is quite clear. Be first across the line, throw it furthest, score more goals than somebody else. And so that shift is very challenging for them to take. And look, good things come in threes, I suppose. The next one is that lack of confidence in translating their capabilities from, well, if I'm really good at scoring goals or crossing the ball, how does that translate into the traditional workforce? So that loss of identity, that fear of the unknown, and that lack of confidence that they're so used to having, those tend to be some of the biggest challenges that elite athletes face as they transition career.
Well said. Great response. Thank you. And now, from your perspective as the founder of Second Wind Academy, what kind of support and help do you give to former athletes?
Look, it's a really good question, because the support that I give really comes around, and something I've learned as I've gone through that investigation into how are people transitioning, and it's been on inspiration, guidance, and connectivity. So often the things that they really need are, well, if I'm not doing this activity, this sport, heading to this Olympics, what am I going to do? So really, it's a lot about inspiring them to think differently, thinking, well, where can I go? What are the other alternatives in my career path? And then guiding them to develop that confidence in their abilities, to know, well, what does work? How is value created? How do some of these things happen? And then importantly, connect them to a different world. I was speaking to a footballer who quite accurately described to me, every day for the past 12 years, he has trained with 10 other men. All he sees and all he talks to are men about sport. And that's been his network. Right. So helping him to break out of that has been one of the big challenges, and giving them the tools to do that has been really key.
And do you also help them find, a new career? Do you counsel them?
That's exactly right. So one of the key facets of what I do from that inspirational, certainly in that guidance, is to give them coaching. So I'm a qualified life coach, career coach, and small business advisor. And I've packaged that together along, I would say, with that, the banking experience, the innovation and strategy, to say, well, how do you create value? And I use those tools and techniques to help those individuals to recognize, okay, how do they bring value? How do they translate their value from, one market to another market? And how do they really set themselves up for success?
Because, when I was preparing to talk to you, I did speak to a few other friends, and the general impression amongst the average human being is that if you're an elite athlete, financially you are secure. And therefore, now the question comes of, how do you retrain yourself for a new role? Would that be a correct assumption on the financial security?
So on the financial security, many of us do assume that elite athletes, and I guess when you go to the elite of the elite, that top 1%, that the 1% of the 1%, yes, they are financially fine. They have a different challenge in terms of their career. But when you look at the majority of athletes who go to the Olympics, who came fourth in the 100 meters at the Tokyo Olympics, now you think, how much have they had to dedicate in order to be the fourth fastest man or woman in that game? Well, They didn't get on the podium. How much money do they earn? Do they earn enough for a lifetime? For many of the athletes, their focus is on athletic excellence. It's not on the financial and the gain. They don't see that. So in terms of the financial outcomes that many athletes get, it isn't sustainable. When they retire at 30 years old, that's not enough to have the house, the family, and the rest of that life that comes through.
Well said. And as the old saying goes, no one remembers who came second.
Very true. That's very true. Yeah.
That's so right. The other aspect, Ryan, that I also wanted to talk to you about is the mental health and well-being of former athletes. And how do you support them? Because one is financial, one is, what you just said, fear. But I've also met people who are confused on what to do next.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that mental health is something I'd say over the past 5 years, maybe 10, we've become a lot more comfortable talking about. And it is a challenge. It's a big challenge for athletes. And I know myself from firsthand experience, I had some very difficult or dark times as I came through that career transition. One of the main things that I do with the athletes is get them to talk. Is the program that I've developed based on the experience of speaking to athletes really starts getting them into small, trusted teams, which is how many of them developed and many of them trained, you know, over their years in elite sport. So making sure that they have that conversation. And one of the ways I've done that is certainly through recording conversations with elite athletes for them to share their experience, to openly discuss, yeah, it's tough. Well, what helped you get through that? And then giving them that stepped approach to come out the other side and be able to thrive in that game of life.
How interesting. And you must also be collaborating with other organizations or professionals to provide a comprehensive support to former athletes. Tell me a little bit about such collaborations, if any.
Yes, certainly collaboration is, for me, one of the key elements of this. Is that network is trying to understand that you can't do it alone. Now, for athletes, for many of them, they know that because they've been coached. They recognize the value of being in a team and the specific role that they play. And I see that as the same way. And that's one of the elements I've set up through that, the Second Wind Academy, is that connectedness. So I work with, so I'm not a recruitment practitioner. I'm not placing people. I think I focus on the coaching and the individual, but I help them find appropriate recruiters. In many of the sporting associations, the Olympic Committee Association, the player associations, they have wellness advisors or guidance counselors. So I work with them to provide options to the many who say, actually, I don't want to sit in a one-on-one conversation with a counselor because I don't know what I want to do. So what I then do is I collaborate with them to say, well, let me use a bit more design thinking, athlete-centered approach to help those athletes be inspired to think about what comes next.
Well said. And Ryan, are there any specific programs or initiatives that you are particularly proud of that you have developed?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Actually, you know, for me, it all started off that one conversation on the side of the touchline when that individual told me their story. And that led me down a path to go and speak to athletes and not make assumptions like many have done. You know, many of the larger organizations will say, this is what athletes need, let's give them that. So the way that I've approached it is quite simply by speaking to the athletes, by recording those conversations, by listening and using a lot of the skills I used from my business world in terms of strategic planning and where should we go and which markets are we in, and help to use that for athletes. And that's helped me develop a program for them that helps them through figuring out another plan A or an athlete career design program that really focuses on those individuals over a short period to let them see what they might aspire to be and then give them a real tangible path to go ahead and do it.
My next question is that how would you, as the founder of Second Wind Academy, measure the impact and your success?
Do you know, it's one of the hardest questions. And it's one of the hardest questions that I even as an entrepreneur coming out of corporate banking, I'm like, well, it used to be all on profit, or it used to be by winning the league.
Correct.
Now, in this particular role, in this company, how do I measure success? Well, for me, the success is certainly by outcome driven. And I look at that through the outcomes that those athletes who come through my program, what do they achieve? Many of them come in fearful, lack of clarity, or low in confidence. And what I then see are the types of roles and types of courses that they then go into. And that's really how I measure measure the success of Second Wind.
And when you look at some of the people who you have supported or coached, give me an example of a couple or a few resettlements, if I can use that term, you have done without, of course, any names.
Yes, yeah. Look, there are. I think an interesting one is an athlete who came out of professional football.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually went through some help, used the Players Association as they came through, found themselves very much in a job, actually in a relatively sales-focused role. And they found themselves standing in the mid-commute, standing on the subway and looking around them a year and a half after retirement, thinking, well, is this it? Is this the next 40 years of my life? And it was at that point that they contacted me. And it was at that point that I was able to help them to reassess their purpose, reassess, well, what are the capabilities? What are your skill set? And whilst from the outside, they appeared as a very competitive and, therefore naturally in a sales-driven organization, what actually drove them was team orientation. And so where they were better suited was helping them recognize what type of culture could they thrive in and what were the skills that they would bring to that. And then we put in place that plan. And now they actually find themselves working, not necessarily in recruitment, but in people and culture, and much more naturally suited to their particular style of operating.
How wonderful. How wonderful. And when you look at, Second Wind, would also love to get some feedback you have received
yes,
based from your clients or your elite athletes who have been through your program.
Actually, I had one last week. And what she said to me was she appreciated the brutal honesty that I gave her. And that was something, since she'd moved into that her first role in corporate, the feedback wasn't the same. She said the feedback was like they went around the bush to say, maybe you could have done this presentation a bit differently, which is very different to when she was on the field, and it was the crowd telling her, you missed the pass. When you have 1,000 or more, 10,000 people telling you that wasn't a good pass, that is instant feedback. And so the feedback she gave to me was she loved that brutal honesty and directness that I was able to give.
Amazing. Amazing. What a great example. Thank you. So I have time for two more questions for you. My next question is, looking ahead, what are your hopes and goals for Second Wind Academy in terms of its impact on the lives of former elite athletes?
For Second Wind, where I really want it to get to is continuing to drive a better, more confident athlete career transition. And I think to do that, the measure is going to be the number of people that it can actually support. I love doing the one-on-one, and as a coach working with one person or working with three people, I can see the impact that has. Where I'd love to see Second Wind go and really make that impact is being able to tangibly support more athletes. So move at a broader scale. I've recognized that the challenge of one athlete is very comparable, very similar to those across different codes and across different markets. And so being able to bring some of the core tenets of what I do and get that through use of the platform across more markets, that's certainly something that I would look to do, definitely.
Amazing. And my last question to you, Ryan, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your own understanding of athletics, sports, corporate career, entrepreneurship, what would you say are 3 lessons you would like a lot of our young viewers and listeners to take back? Because I know that with given much better financial conditions of parents, a lot of parents are encouraging children to take up sports and maybe even turn professional. What are some lessons you would want them to remember?
Give it everything that you possibly can in terms of pursuing excellence. Driving that through sport, I think, is absolutely critical because of the lessons that you learn from participating in sport. One of the key elements to recognize is sport and achieving that elite level is an experience.
Correct.
I very much start to say it's not necessarily a career, it is an experience, and you've got to love that experience and really take that for what you can whilst you have. One of the key elements then is to also be aware of what energizes you outside of that game. outside of the athletics or dance or the sport. What energizes you outside of that? Because that energy, if honed, if tapped into, becomes that passion for when you retire from the game, when your time is up. And the brutal truth of sport is often it's not you who makes the decision. It's the person who gets across the line first. And they turn to you and they tell you your time is up. So understand what energizes you outside of the game is absolutely critical.
Amazing, amazing. And on that note, Ryan, and your amazing lessons, the first one you said, which is so important, give it everything you can to pursue excellence. And the second one you said was be aware of what energizes you beyond sports, because that could potentially be a soft landing for your second wind, if I can use the term also. Thank you, Ryan, for speaking to me about your own journey. Thank you for speaking to me about Second Wind Academy, about all the support that you're giving to so many different sportsmen in so many different areas. I wish you lots of success in everything that you're doing. Good luck.
Thank you very much. Love being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.